Today's episode will be our last walkthrough of the Minnesota Zoo, but we are ending on a big note. Their Northern Trail is not only one of the largest exhibits in the world, but also one that set a new standard when it opened with the zoo in 1978. Its expansive, naturalistic habitats are the kind that every zoo wishes they could have. We'll explore its newest record-breaking feature, meet its newest and cutest residents, learn how this zoo is still saving species. We'll even highlight animals that are no longer even at the zoo. And this is the only time where I can say you will technically be treated to 3 episodes in one. So, with that said, let's get started.
The first thing you need to know about the Northern Trail is you're going to be walking for a while, nearly 3/4 of a mile. And that's if you don't include the detour at the Amphitheater, Wells Fargo Family Farm, or elevate your experience on the Treetop Trail. About a year after the zoo opened its gates, one of the zoo's signature features was a monorail or a sky trail that offered a bird's eye view of the Northern Trail. However, due to rising maintenance costs, it closed in 2013. Some of the cars were actually sold and repurposed into a campsite. 10 years later, the zoo repurposed the monorail into a walking trail, the world's longest elevated pedestrian loop. This 1.25 mile elevated path rises up at most 32 feet and gives a unique perspective of not only these incredible habitats, but some parts of the zoo that you can't access on the ground, such as a large portion of the zoo's gorgeous undeveloped nature. If you prefer not to walk the trail the entire time, there are several points where you can return to ground level, including the old monorail loading station. Last time we all got together, we explored the explosive award-winning Russia's Grizzly Coast. We saw bears, otters, pigs, and leopards. But I'm surprised that no one called me out and said that I skipped an exhibit, the one that immediately follows the leopards, because you could argue that it is part of the Russia's Grizzly Coast. So what I'm going to do is save them for the end of today's journey. This trail is all about animals built for the extremes, that thrive and find safety in rugged, harsh climates. And up ahead, we are about to see one of the toughest of them all. An animal so unique, it looks like a mashup of several other kinds of mammals. The Sichuan Takin. No matter how many times I see them, it never gets old. Every time, visitors are astounded, like they can't believe what they're looking at. I've heard guesses that they are some kind of sheep, a giant goat, and even a bear from a first glancer. The 4 Takin subspecies are part of what's called a subfamily of caprines, consisting of wild sheep, taurs, ibex, and even mountain goats. This shaggy beast roams the high-altitude forests in the eastern Himalayas, 4,000 to 12,000 feet above sea level. Its secret, stocky, shock-absorbing legs, and a dense, oily coat that shrugs off rain like a waterproof jacket. They are so wild, Takins may have even inspired legends, including one of the most famous stories in Greek mythology, a central to the tale of Jason and the Argonauts. Long story short, Jason embarks on a quest to retrieve a golden fleece worn by a golden ram to prove himself and reclaim his rightful place on the throne. The more popular theory is that this story originated from miners who used sheepskin to filter gold from mountain streams, while others believe it was the golden takin who inspired the myth, a subspecies I hope we as a tour group can see one day. Keep your eyes up ahead, because up next is one of the most iconic giants in North America, American bison, the largest land animal on the continent. we have talked about the American bison's conservation success story, how the millions that once roamed the continent's plains were hunted to the brink of extinction, and how zoos, ranchers, and other state parks preserved this powerful species. However, if you read their sign at the zoo, it tells us genetic research has shown that many bison carry a significant percentage of cattle DNA due to crossbreeding. Fortunately, pure bison lineages have been identified in the herd that lives in Minnesota's Blue Mound State Park. To help preserve these genetics, the Minnesota Zoo has joined forces with the Department of Natural Resources to sustain healthy bloodlines and breed bison for release in Minnesota's state parks. Ensuring a strong genetic diversity is the next critical step in pure bison conservation. Their habitat here is one of many reasons why I said the Northern Trail has features every zoo wishes it could have, but a lot don't due to a lack of space. This bison territory takes up 4 of the Northern Trail's 55 plus acres, which does not include the Treetop Trail's venture into the uninterrupted surrounding nature. So if you haven't figured it out by now, every exhibit here is larger than average, but I can't say that about every species. Black-tailed prairie dogs. If you couldn't tell, they are not dogs. Rather, these furry little nuggets are rodents. More specifically, they are in the same family as squirrels. Their canine name comes from their calls, which apparently sounds similar to a dog's bark. And I actually managed to record one that was out of frame. Before I play it, I want you to comment below what dog you thought it would sound like. Let's hear that again. They naturally inhabit the Great Plains grasslands in North America, from the southern border of Canada down to northern Mexico. Like we've seen with naked mole rats in other videos, prairie dogs live together in a network of underground burrows called a town. The largest town ever recorded covered 25,000 square miles. Even though the average town is less than a square mile, it still contains hundreds of residents. As grasslands have been converted for other uses over the last century, prairie dog habitats have decreased by 98%. Fortunately, they are not considered endangered, as they still number in the millions. If you noticed, their Minnesota home looked a little different in between shots. That's because it went through a renovation over the last year, and I heard the zoo had to sort of recreate it because they escaped into the bison habitat. This was filmed in 2021, this in 2024. Hopefully it won't be long before it returns to its green look. The Northern Trail's pens are so good. I know a lot of zoo enthusiasts who would say that they are almost too good, and occasionally it might be hard to find its occupants, especially from the Treetop Trail. Starting a game of hide and seek, and it did take me an extra second to find the pronghorn. It's also widely known as the pronghorn antelope. Pronghorn refers to its distinct forked horns, and antelope comes from the fact that European settlers thought it resembled an African antelope due to its slender build and speed. I don't blame them, they sure do look a lot like springbok to me. It says here at the zoo that pronghorn have no living relatives. While it is the only living member of its genus, if you were to Google their relatives, you will now find endless sources stating that pronghorn are more so distant relatives of the giraffe and therefore the okapi than they are to true antelope. I guess I have to admit what I said in this episode was wrong. Nat Geo says this relation may explain why they are the exception to a very strict rule in the animal kingdom. Animals with antlers like deer shed and regrow their antlers every year. Animals with horns, like antelope, never shed their headgear. Pronghorns do shed their horns, but not in the way you may think. They don't just fall off. Rather, they shed and regrow a sheath that covers the actual horn underneath. What I came across next is something I've never been able to experience, since it is a seasonal exhibit. The Llama Trek is a large pit of land that invites you to walk about, you guessed it, llamas. And I found one source that did say there are or were guinea pigs, and there was even mention of a flightless bird called a rhea, replacing the short-lived kangaroo crossing. It is only open in its fullest form from May to Labor Day, and it seems that I just missed seeing all of its animals by just a few weeks. As you can see though, there were still a lot of dwarf goats in the llama's place. I'm sure llamas and I will cross paths again one day, but it's never a guarantee when it comes to a certain animal that proved it can never be tamed. The Przewalski's wild horse, the domestic horse's closest wild living relative, a remarkable, untamable animal that once covered the grasslands of Europe and Asia. But competition with humans and livestock, along with environmental changes, pushed the horse eastward, ultimately leading to its extinction in the wild in the 1960s. Much like the bison, we can thank zoos and captive breeding in general for keeping their hopes and existence alive. The Minnesota Zoo took action and got involved as soon as they opened in the late 70s. After breeding several foals, eventually the zoo sent a stallion to a facility in the Netherlands to then breed a new group of wild horses that would be released into the wild. Now, there could be as many as 2,000 wild horses in Mongolia, China, Kazakhstan, and even Spain. With all this talk of conservation, if you know any others, I want you to comment below another example of how zoos saved an endangered species. This isn't their only space. Depending on the day, you can find the herd in an even bigger field across the path. You might ask, why not just have them access both exhibits at the same time? That's because they rotate with camels, one of 49 mammals native to the Gobi Desert, where extreme temperature shifts occur. There's limited food and water, and harsh terrain that make it difficult to survive. Their knee pads shield their skin when kneeling on rocky ground, while their long eyelashes and closable nostrils help protect their eyes and lungs from blowing sand. Poaching, climate change, and other human encroachment have left them critically endangered. But I do have to reveal, though, you are not looking at that Bactrian camel. There may be less than 1,000 left in the wild, but what you are looking at is one of a few of the millions of domestic Bactrian camels. The zoo, however, is still supporting organizations who track these two-humped camels to better understand their migratory patterns to then determine where we can set up areas to protect them. Before we get to our next major stop, I want to talk about an iconic animal that actually no longer calls the zoo home. The Treetop Trail will take you right in the middle of the largest enclosure in the zoo's recent history. I was told that the wild horses are sometimes found in here, but historically, this was the permanent home of the musk oxen. They look like they would be perfect for Minnesota. And I don't just mean the zoo, but they look like they would thrive in the Minnesota wilds. This may have been true at one point in time, but that's no longer the case. 65 muskox calves were born at the zoo. Over a decade ago, keepers did notice they were struggling to thrive, and they attributed their declining health to the state's increasingly warm summers. And so it seems Minnesota is now too far south for this Arctic species to live. So in 2021, they were officially phased out. Today, the only zoo-kept muskox herd that can be found in the lower 48 states is at the Point Defiant Zoo in Tacoma, Washington, which you can learn more about in that card in the corner. We are now going to be shifting gears for a minute or two. Before you get to the old muskox enclosure, the Treetop Trail will take you to one of its drop-off or access points to the Nature Center. There are not any animals as far as I saw, but this two-story building is essentially a year-round art gallery featuring paintings and pictures of lake life in Minnesota. It's also a gateway to our next attraction that's about a 5-minute walk away from the horses and camels, the Wells Fargo Family Farm, where people, animals, and plants meet. I know firsthand that zoo-goers aren't always excited about farm animals versus true wildlife they would otherwise never see outside of a zoo, and they're usually attributed to simple petting zoos. But this goes way beyond your average petting zoo. Think of it as a life lesson. These charming 7 acres offer a look into Minnesota's rich agricultural history, allowing visitors to engage in hands-on experiences. There are cows, a lot of goats, horses that I sadly missed, pigs, and sheep, and you get to see how they contribute to our everyday lives. Sadly, I regret that I didn't film much of it, and I wish we could stay longer. So I encourage you to check out the family farm for yourself. Not only did it win the zoo a Best Exhibit award, I overheard an older couple say that this area is amazing because city folk just don't know how this all works. So obviously with that alone, it's worth a visit. What we are about to see next, I'm once again sad to say, is another rare zoo animal that's no longer at the zoo. I don't mean to present the species as if it's still here, but I did wait a long time to get this footage, and this could be the last time as a tour group we get to see the dhole, which was phased out in 2023. Also known as the Asian wild dog, they are a versatile predator from the forests of Thailand, alpine regions of Russia, steppes in China, and the scrub forests in India. I just implied that they are hard to come by, so how rare are we talking? And why would this be the last time we see one? First of all, despite it being so widespread, dholes are endangered, with fewer than 2,500 left in the wild. For as long as I've been interested in zoos, they were on my radar because I knew so few facilities took care of them. Only a few years ago, there were 5 or 6 AZA holders in the United States. As of this moment, there's only 2, or at least 2 that publicly show them: the Bronx Zoo in New York and the Wilds Conservation Park in Ohio. This exhibit was actually home to Mexican wolves before there were dholes, so you would think another canine could fill their spot. On the other hand, though, there is news that climbing structures were added, but no word of what they're actually for. So leave a comment below if you have any guesses. I was so excited after spotting our next not-so-little critter that it seems I forgot to film its yet again large enclosure. Good thing I know a certain website that I can rely on when this happens. If you ask me though, I think it looks way better like this in the winter without all the vegetation. I imagine then it's easier to find the moose, the world's largest species of deer. A full-grown bull can weigh 1,600 pounds, and he's doing the right thing by staying as far away from us as he can. So far that my furthest zoom feature couldn't capture his details. This is the Northern Trail's only animal currently found in Minnesota's nature, and their interactive signage not only shows us all of the threats that moose face in the wild, but how they are surviving in this state of 10,000 lakes. The Minnesota population declined more than 50% from 2006 to 2015, but according to the Natural Department of Resources, their 2025 survey saw a population rise from the previous year, going from 3,400 to 4,000 individuals. Remember how hard it was to find the pronghorn? Well, that's mainly because we were looking at females who have really small horns that don't protrude above the grass. I had a similar situation here, but both male and female reindeer have antlers to make it easier for us to see them. When they shed their antlers off, I really mean they come completely off. Males or bulls lose them in the late fall. Females or cows keep theirs through the winter until their calves are born in the spring. When you saw them, I'm willing to bet the word caribou popped in your head. Well, if you read their sign, it says in North America, the name caribou describes the wild animal, while reindeer refers to its domestic form. But in Europe, they're referred to as reindeer, whether they are wild or not. If we are going by the North American definition, these are domestic reindeer, but the zoo did have wild woodland caribou just a few years ago, and caribou were naturally found in the northern parts of Minnesota, but their numbers declined in the 1800s due to logging, hunting, and the spread of white-tailed deer, which carried a parasitic brainworm that is fatal to both moose and caribou. Since the Northern Trail is no walk in the park, you could give your legs a break and sit inside the Amphitheater. It does host the World of Birds show that once again I sadly missed because it's seasonal, but I do know that it's engaging and informative, and you are welcome to explore the Amphitheater even when there isn't a scheduled showtime. Coming up is something I haven't seen at any zoo exhibit before. Maybe something similar at the entrance of the San Diego Zoo, but not in an exhibit. This is Zeus, a 35-foot-long tiger sculpture designed with the intent that he was designed by nature. So that's probably why the firm that built him described him as hidden. And based on the miniature, I can definitely see what they were going for. Honestly, I'm glad his presence isn't subtle, because he makes a perfect beacon telling you that you have reached the Tiger Lair, a separate attraction in its own right. A lot of what you saw today was a product of the late 70s. The Tiger Lair was established in 2002, and it's still one of the best big cat habitats ever built. And in my opinion, even though you are watching them from a distance, I think it's best viewed from the Treetop Trail, so you can take in the entire complex in one vantage point. As good as it is, the zoo wanted to make it even better and added upgrades in 2020, which included an 18-foot waterfall. And as some have pointed out, the rockwork is sort of shaped like a tiger's paw, which you can better make out from aerial photos. It's also been pointed out that the design of the rockwork was a bit of an odd choice and has been described as unnatural looking. But I'd like to shoot these criticisms down. To keep it short, they are actually based on something called columnar jointing, which happens when lava cools and cracks in a special way, forming tall, rock columns that look like giant puzzle pieces stacked together. So it wasn't just made for aesthetics. They are found in nature. The renovation also came with an upgraded glass viewing platform to make it safer for crowd control and make it more ADA accessible. Of course, though, this wasn't just designed for you to watch the cats, but for you to learn about them, covering everything from their hunting abilities. And I definitely need to shout out this simulated moose carcass, disguised as a feeding station that allows us to view tiger feeding behavior. And technically the food is delivered inside the exhibit and placed in the moose's gut cavity from an underground tube. Inside the shelter, you can physically compare yourself to tigers, how big cats and little house cats compare to one another, a map of every tiger subspecies, highlighting who's existing and who's extinct, and what the zoo is doing to help this endangered Amur or Siberian tiger. And one way to do that is to take part in a breeding program. The lair is 3/4 of an acre, but you may have noticed that there's a fence in the middle, cutting the habitat in half. One reason they did this was to allow this pair of adults to be outside at the same time as the zoo's 2 tiger cubs, born in May 2024 to mother Sundari. After spending their initial months bonding behind the scenes, these siblings made their public debut in September 2024, apparently 10 days after my visit, so lucky me. But if you can and you want to see baby tigers, I really recommend you get here as fast as you can. Tiger cubs are born small, but grow fast, starting around 1.5 to 3.5 pounds, but can weigh up to 100 pounds at 6 months old. Generally, they will stay with their mother until they master hunting, typically around 18 to 24 months old. They become fully independent after 2 to 3 years, at which point they will leave and establish their own territory. Females tend to stay closer to their mother's range, while males will venture further out to find their own space. Anyways, as I was saying, you could argue that our last stop, the Tiger Base Camp, is part of the Russia's Grizzly Coast because a tiger is on the entrance map. Amur tigers are naturally found where this exhibit is themed after, and it's located immediately after the Amur leopards. But I don't consider the Tiger Base Camp to be a part of it, because it predates Russia's Grizzly Coast, and I believe it also opened or was renovated in 2002 as well. Oh, and because I didn't want to feature tigers 2 weeks in a row to keep things interesting. The tiger Lair gets you whisker close to the cats. The base camp was specifically designed after a small Russian base camp where scientists study tigers from a distance, educating guests about how much a Siberian tiger will eat in 1 year, along with field techniques like camera traps, smile, and radio collars that researchers use to track tigers. In fact, you can wave this antenna to find a discarded collar in the exhibit. When it beeps really fast, it means the antenna is pointing directly at it. When I said this was small, I want to specify that I was only referring to the actual viewing shelter, because this habitat is huge. I know, we are in the Northern Trail, so it's pretty much expected. This boardwalk literally puts you smack dab in the middle of this lush forest that's over 1.5 acres. This was a breath of fresh air to see a tiger so far away from the crowd that they looked like ants from all the way up here. And when you combine the base camp with the tiger lair, that's nearly 2.5 acres of space, making this the largest big cat complex I have ever seen. And when you combine it with its other educational elements, I'm not afraid to say, the best tiger facility you will find in an American zoo is right here in Minneapolis. The Minnesota Zoo's Northern Trail offers an unforgettable journey through the diverse landscapes of North America and Asia. Every habitat is thoughtfully designed, educationally engaging, and its conservation-driven initiatives truly highlight the zoo's commitment to protecting wildlife. This is clearly a must-see, and without a doubt in my mind, objectively one of the best zoo exhibits ever made. And it's a fitting finale to our tours at the Minnesota Zoo. And if you made it to the end, I want to especially thank you for exploring it with me. Now, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel even more, you can either, of course, like and subscribe, use my promo code to get some cold-blooded caffeine, or consider becoming a channel member so you can see the next episode before anyone else, and pretty soon, even vote on what the next video will be. So, with that, thank you all for watching. Stay wild, and consider using the information that you learned today to go out and make a difference.